Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to introduce the CFPR speaker today, Prof. Zheng Mu. Prof. Mu is an assistant professor in the NUS Department of Sociology. Her work is largely quantitative and focuses on marriage, family, and ethnicity. Her work inspires deeper thinking about social issues which are fundamental to societies in Asia and beyond. Prof, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Pook, for the invitation, and thank you, Andy, for kindly chairing the session for me, and also thank you everyone for joining us today. And so this is, we just discussed how this is actually the first ever research project since I attended graduate school, like more than 10 years ago. And we wrote up something else, but eventually we find that this project is also very interesting. And so recently we have decided to develop it into a better, like a more mature paper. And so specifically it is about this interplay of this Islamic-based traditions and China's modernization process. And specifically we'll look at how the state and the religiosity plays a role in Chinese Muslims' cohabitation patterns. And so this is a joint work with my previous peer graduate students, Qing Lai, who is now teach at Florida International University, and my supervisor, Yu Xie at Princeton. And so in this paper, we want to answer basically these two research questions. Firstly, are Chinese Muslims more or less likely to cohabit than Han Chinese? And you may find the answer to this obvious at first glance, but we will discuss the nuances actually in the answer to that, which actually surprises us and hopefully will give you a nice surprise as well. And then more importantly, we would want to explain the ethnic differences in the cohabitation patterns. And so, first of all, why should we care about Chinese Muslims cohabitation, right? And so before we go into that, in particular, let's look at these natures and meanings of cohabitation in general. So based on Professor Lostaga's very recent development of his second demographic transition framework in 2020. And so basically he have penned out this frameworks that can explain the patterns and the prevalence of cohabitation in 3 dimensions. First of them is this ideational change. I believe many of you in the audience must be very familiar with this framework of the second demographic transition. So basically, it emphasizes importance of people's ideological, ideational, attitudinal changes in influencing their family behaviors and their personal choices. And so basically, this second demographic transition, in comparison to the first demographic transition, which focused more on this actual behavioral changes, stresses the importance of ideational change. And so basically, the society has moved towards this more open, liberal ideologies. And so characterized by basically this articulation of individual autonomy, this importance to express one's personal goals and needs. And so it has been reflected in the domain of family, like in the forms of all those like modern or postmodern behaviors, right? And such as this low fertility and singleness, as well as cohabitation. Basically, it is about this more diverse and open possibilities about people's familial relationships and personal choices. And of course, there's still been a very entrenched economic gradients attached to the patterns of economic cohabitation. And so basically, as Professor Lostaga called it, is this pattern of disadvantage, or how cohabitation actually plays a role as a poor man's marriage, right? And so even now today, when marriage is now the terminal goals for all individuals, still, as many family demographers have found out, marriage still holds a very important symbolic and social meanings. And so in order to signify that social importance, many times it requires social approvals and particularly this financial preparations for entering into marriage. Basically, it's this capstone to show that you are ready, right? And you are socially and financially mature. And so it is not required for cohabitation, but it's required for married couples, for example, to hold a formal, exquisite wedding ceremony and to have a purchased housing for their new household. As a result, many times, even though the couple, they intend to get married eventually, but given the financial limitations, constraints, they may just postpone it and cohabit instead, either as a trial marriage or as this financial buffer zone that they can save money, right? And until they get financially prepared. And of course, beyond these two bigger pictures, these two big social processes, there's still been this contextual variations and driven by this diversity in the historical patterns in different societies. And so I find it's quite fascinating and interesting. So I would want to take several minutes to discuss about these variations. And so basically, based on Lestaga's framework, this historical ethno-historical patterns are helping fall into these four kind of societies, Asian and North Africa. And so basically in this kind of societies, there has been this entrenched patriarchal control over women, this very obvious some preferences, right? And this story system. And so in these societies, you could imagine that cohabitation may has major implications for this sexual freedom, especially for women. As a result, in this kind of societies, cohabitation is usually deeply stigmatized, and there has been this major hostility towards it. And there, of course, as we discuss later, there has already been change. But for some groups, for example, for the Muslims or the Hindu, and who have a very strong, entrenched religious foundation, for that stigmatization, the change has still been quite limited. And then there's been this societies called this Old and New Europe. So basically those societies used to be, their marriage systems used to be largely controlled by the Christianity-oriented conjugal marriage. As a result, so basically this premarital sexual relationships is frowned upon, and so basically it's celebrate this religious secrecy of marriage. As a result, there has been some initial low level of cohabitation in this kind of societies, but of course, along with this post-war secularization, this second demographic transition, articulation, and emphasis of individual freedom, there has been change. It has been arisen in these societies. And of course, in the same time, this rising capitalism in the societies have enlarged this social inequality, and which makes this poor man harder to get financially ready for marriage. And of course, this free market and these workplaces has also provided this main location for potential marriage markets. And so young men and women go to meet and date and build up romantic relationship, cohabit, and so on. And so there has been some rising trends in these societies. And thirdly, this syncretic America. And so basically it's a mixture of things. There has been something indigenous and which has a more open attitudes towards cohabitation and diverse ways because of their tribal or the natal traditions, and this European immigrants definitely have brought in this conjugal models, and so there has been like a mixture of like quite some elements. And so lastly, there has been this sub-Sahara Africa, which has also witnessed a diversity of the patterns and the exception of cohabitation. And so basically there are multiple forms of partnership. Some of them are driven by this Islamic tradition, but some others more driven by the tribal cultures. And so there has been quite some transitions and moving from this polygyny to concubinage, and basically the social status of different wives are hierarchical, but they live under the same roof in the same household. But with this modern legal system, there has been this like informal forms of polygyny, and so basically it largely takes the form of cohabitation as a new house, and so different wives socially take equal social status, but legally they may not be all legally recognized. And so there has been quite a diversity in this kind of societies. And so in general, as you could see, the trends and patterns of cohabitation have been driven by these three mechanisms, right? The second demographic transition, ideational change, this poor man's marriage, this socioeconomic gradients, as well as this ethno-historiographic historical patterns. But in general, so based on a very comprehensive scrutiny of different patterns, and so basically there has been a universal global rise in cohabitation in all parts of the world, except in Muslim and Hindu patriarchal societies. And actually, Professor Lastaga actually predicts this continued strong resistance to that because of this very entrenched and this strong religious foundations, which stigmatize this premarital sexuality, especially among women. And then what about China? And so China, not only at the grassroots level, but also according to the Chinese state, there has been this very enthusiastic promotions of the idea of modernization. And more importantly, there has been widely and state-supported propaganda about the association of modern family forms and economic development. And so, for example, the one-child policy, that if you have a lower fertility level, then the government explain to you that so that's actually one way to achieve economic prosperity, which turns out may not be the case, but that has been something largely inculcated in ordinary people's minds in China. And as a result, there has been like a steady increase in the level of cohabitation in China. And so based on this data for this 2010 and 2012 marriage cohorts, actually a third of them have been involved in premarital cohabitation. And basically, if we could have more data, I believe that we will see a steady increase. And so basically, it's actually falls well into Lastaga's framework that on the one hand, there has been this ideational change, both due to this globalization, modernization, economic development, as well as state-sponsored propaganda. And so people start to be aware and celebrate their individual autonomy in their personal choices. And of course, at the same time, it's always difficult to challenge tradition. And so in China, this norm of universal marriage is still very strong. And so even though people may choose different trajectories, but eventually they may think that marriage is something important and even required. And so for like based on this 2010 census data, actually, for both men and women, less than 5% of the population above age 30 has never been married. And so this norm of universal marriage is still very strong. But accompany that norm of universal marriage, it's this also very strong like financial requirements for it, because we value marriage so much, so we would want to signify it both socially and financially. And so in China, purchase of housing upon marriage is still largely required or strongly recommended. And you could imagine that in the face of this skyrocketing cost of living and housing in China, it's like a large burden on young couples' shoulders. And especially given that now cohabitation is additionally more acceptable, and so they will just take the form of cohabitation and to use this buffer zone to save up until they get married properly, right? Then how about this ethno-religious aspects of China? And so as we just discussed, basically after this like very comprehensive survey of all the patterns of cohabitation around the globe, Professor Lastaga find that basically this Muslim-oriented societies still has this very strong resistance to the idea of premarital cohabitation. Then given China's like very significant group of Muslims, how would Muslims cohabitation patterns compare to that of the Han majority? And before we go into that, let me give you some background information about Muslims in China. And so basically, the Muslim Chinese have been, according to their places of inhabitation, has been these inland Muslims. And so basically for them, they don't have like a very well established foreign state and to feel attached to. And so also geographically, they tend to live in the inland of China. And in comparison to it, there has been borderline Muslims and the Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Tajik, Uzbek, Tatar. Many of them, they have like a very well established like a foreign heritage, and or in another word, they are very ethnically visible. And so they differ from the Han Chinese saliently, right, regarding their language and regarding their genetic, their heritage, the culture, and so on. And as a result, in comparison to the borderline Muslims, the situations faced by the inland Muslims tends to be more complex and complicated. And so as we'll see that if we look at the geographical concentration, is also that those borderline Muslims, they're largely geographically concentrated. So you could see those groups, like the majority of them have been living in Xinjiang, right? And so it is easier for them to maintain their group identity in that way. But for these other groups, and so specifically for Zhongxiang, Sala, Bao'an, and so basically Zhongxiang and Bao'an are both Mongolic spoken Muslims, but they have been undergoing tremendous assimilation. And so actually during our field work, many of the Dongxiang, for example, they identify strongly with Hui, who are like more ethnically similar to Han, but distinguished from them according to the Islamic religion. And Salah, on the other hand, speak this Turkic oriented language. And you could see that still for these three inland Muslim groups, they are very geographically concentrated. So almost 90% of Dongxiang lives in Gansu, and 82% of Sala in Qinghai, and 90% of Bao'an in Gansu as well. And as a result, the Hui kind of stands out in terms of their ethnic identity and their relationship with the Han majority, right? So what we could see here is that like over half of them actually are scattered in those non-Muslim dominated areas in China. So they might be subject to this even more convoluting and nuanced tensions. On the one hand, they need to assimilate and integrate into the main culture, and on the other hand, in face of that, how could they maintain their ethnic identity when religion is only a distinction, right? As a result, in this paper, and we will focus on the comparison between Hui Muslims and the Han majority, and due to the data collection, and we also have a sample of Dongxiang group. And as we said that, so although they have Mongolic language, but they largely identify with Hui. And so we are going to compare this, conduct this three-group comparison, and to look at how this interplay of religion and this linguistic characteristics will distinguish them in their cohabitation patterns. And more words about the Hui Muslims. These only Chinese Sinophonic Muslims. They don't have their own language. And so in terms of population size, they are actually the largest Muslim groups in China and the second largest ethnic minority group. And so numerically, they have almost 11 million, and they are actually accounts for almost half of the entire Chinese Muslim population. And so, as we said, that basically there is a group that are subject to the strongest attention to assimilate and to maintain their own ethnic identity, because not only their unique origins, but also what they are in their today's residential patterns, right? And so origin wise, and so basically this group are the historical immigrants from this Middle Eastern area, Central Asia, through a long period of time. And then they basically settle down mostly in the northwestern part of China. And so it's basically this several province or autonomous regions, Gansu, Ningxia, Qinghai, and Xinjiang. And so the result of it is that they have picked up many of those like social and like language, of course, and cultural practices of the Han majority. And especially given that they do not have their own language, and so this religion could be the only thing that effectively distinguish themselves from the Han majority. And as we just discussed, and so the Hui is also a stateless Muslim group, that they do not have like well celebrated and well-established foreign heritage, because their migration in China has been so long time ago and from so many diverse origins, and they have been undergoing like a very tremendous and aggressive process of intermarriage with the locals, and some of them are even descendants of Han convert to Islam because the community has been so Islamic oriented. As a result, they are more likely subject to this tension. And actually, China's ethnic groups have been like officially characterized, and so meaning that it may involve some mandatory practice, and so some like legally and officially like categorized groups, they may share like some religious or heritage, and some of them they're actually in one group may be very different. And so for the Hui group, they basically are singly like categorized as a separate ethnic group because of the Islamic belief, different from other groups. Some of are due to combinations of religion and language. Some of them are about genetic language and culture, but Islamic belief officially is also the one single salient distinction. As a result, in this identity of Hui, there has been this level of duality that they have already undergone this very dramatic assimilation through intermarriage with the Hui. They already pick up so many things in a very organic way. And on the other hand, when they still want to celebrate their ethnic uniqueness, cling to this religion probably is the remaining way. And this tension might be particularly strong when they still have established Hui communities, which is the case for Northwestern societies. And let me give you two more straightforward examples about that tension. And so basically those two photos were taken by me during my field trip to Linxia Hui Autonomous Prefecture in Gansu back in 2008. And so basically on the left is this photo of a Gongbei, which is a secret tomb for this famous local Hui people or these religious leaders. And so what we'll think here is quite a combination of the traditional Chinese architecture style and of course this Arabic-oriented style, right? And so we've seen this very Arabic characteristics with this dome, this pointy pinnacle, but we could see this outer wall is actually quite Chinese, right? We're seeing all this carved details and this roofs and the walls and so on. And on the right is actually a photo we took in one of the interviewees' family. And so what is said here is basically Allah sent marriage, Allah blessed marriage. And so 主赐良缘. Actually, this Chinese phrase of that is 天赐良缘. It's God sent marriage, heaven blessed marriage. And so we could see that for there's quite a combination that on the one hand, they still take this general form of that traditional Chinese saying, but they adjust it towards their Muslim ways. And another feature for this study is that it's quite a localized study. We focus on this northwestern province, Gansu, which hosts sizable Muslim group. And as we said, especially in this kind of communities, Hui can afford to continue maintain their ethnic identity while meld into this Han ways in other secular aspects of their lives. And so specifically, if you look at the map, Hui, the Gansu is this very long, narrow area. And so you could see that geographically it's also very special, that is kind of right in the middle, right? And so this is Xinjiang, and this is the borderline of China. And then these are Shanxi, Hebei, Beijing, and this eastern and coastal part of China. And so it's right in the middle. And so, of course, economically wise, so it's actually remote from coastal cities, also remote from this development opportunities. So it's very low in terms of the level of economic development. And correspondingly, this general social inequality in this place is also very low, and meaning that so usually the ethnic minority, due to the geographical remoteness or the lack of this required human capital, such as the language skills and so on, they tend to be socioeconomically inferior or disadvantaged. But in Gansu, that may not be the case, as everyone holds a similar economic levels, and so which makes it's kind of an ideal research setting for a quasi-natural experiment, that if we see differences, very much likely it is driven by something happening in the mindsets, either driven by these different levels of acceptance of these modernization ideas or religiosity. And specifically, the data were collected by like when I was in University of Michigan, and there has been this developmental idealism project, and so that project has collected data in a variety of countries. Many of them tends to be like low in development or like very ethnic, and so this is a part of data that have been collected in China, in Gansu, specifically in 2007. And so basically the data sets includes 333 respondents. And so the questions asked are well covering this basic demographic, socioeconomic characteristics, as well as many ideational subjective questions towards their endorsement of development, or those modern family ideals, modern family behaviors. And so the sample has also tried to sampled like Hui Muslims and also some other ethnic groups. And so basically it includes around 550 Han, 48 Hui, and 36 Dongxiang, and one other ethnic group. And so because this, I think, implications for the two is not clear, so we excluded from the analysis. And so we are going to compare the remaining 3 ethnic groups regarding their cohabitation. And so following this survey, we also conducted qualitative interview in 2008. And so not in this entirety of Gansu, but only in this Linxia Autonomous Prefecture of Hui. But we still try to covering this ethnic diversity, and we interviewed 25 Han, 16 Hui, and 11 Dongxiang respondents, and 49 of them are this subsample of the 27 survey. And we also try to get like a better understanding about this like local attitudes and policy experiences, like talking to 2 local officials in charge of the family planning campaigns and 1 local imam. And so basically the topics are covered includes, for example, the understanding of development, understanding of the relationship between development and social inequality, gender inequality, family behaviors, morality, and this modernity, and also the factors influence one's economic well-being. And so like one extra notes about Dongxiang is that, as we said, that it is a Mongolic-speaking Muslim group, but it's largely concentrated in Gansu only, and they actually socially identified with Hui to a large extent. As a result, we also include them in the analysis in order to show how this extra like a layer of linguistic like a barrier has contributed to the differences in their cohabitation. And so let's get warmed up a little bit by looking at some descriptive patterns. And so the first one is the comparison of 9 items measuring the level of endorsement of this modern family forms or modern ideals. And so basically those are based on the yes or no, the binary answer to the question, do you think the following is good for most people around the world? And so if it's yes, then we code it as 1 and 0 otherwise. And so basically the 9 items, including whether or not they think gender equality is important, self-choice marriage is important, and having more children is important. Oh, actually, I want to correct. Actually, we already reverse coded here. So this shows that it's a lower fertility here. And so we reverse coded into the direction of modern behaviors altogether. Sorry for the typo. And marry later and a new local residence, whether or not the young married couple should move out from their natal families upon marriage, and unmarried motherhood, elderly living alone when they are like very old, premarital cohabitation, and premarital sex. And so I guess the patterns in general are largely expected. And so basically, gender inequality, the level of endorsement is very high. And so basically, except for Dongxiang, both Han and Hui, it tends to have like almost all of them, all of the respondents think that it is a good thing that men and women should be equal. And but for the several other items, self-choice marriage, lower fertility, marry later, unmarried motherhood, elderly living alone, we're seeing that there has been like a gradient, right? And so the Han is the most modern, and followed by Hui, and then further by Dongxiang. And so for new local residents, there is a little bit different from the expectation that Dongxiang actually has more modern ideals regarding new local residents. And at the time, I do not have a very good explanation for that yet. And if you look at these 2 items for premarital cohabitation and premarital sex, on the other hand, you'll see that, oh, so in general, this premarital sexuality is still largely frowned upon in this research setting, right? And given its low development and more conservative environment. But if you look closely, that for premarital sex, actually none of the Muslim groups will endorse that. But if you look at premarital cohabitation, actually there's none for Hui, but for Dongxiang, there's still like a higher percentage of endorsement than that of Han. So what's been happening here? It's kind of unexpected, right? And if we look at the behaviors more closely, it's even more surprising. And age at first marriage, quite in alignment with our expectation, right? And Han on average got married at 23, and for Hui 21, and 20 for Dongxiang, like younger for the Muslim groups. However, what you think here, to our surprise, is a significantly higher percentage of ever cohabited experience for the 2 Muslim groups in comparison to Han. What's been happening there? So is that the, in combination of what we look at between premarital cohabitation and premarital sex, it is possible that cohabitation here in the worlds of Chinese Muslims may not indicate this sexual autonomy or sexual expression, but on the other hand, it is possible to be a way to realize their norm of early marriage in response to this very strict and very late minimum age, according to this universally applied Chinese marriage law, right? And so let me give you more information about China's minimum legal ages of marriage. So basically, the Chinese state has been enthusiastic in take control in all aspects of individuals' lives at different levels, at the state level, region level, and the individual level, in public spheres and in private spheres. And so the control over individuals' private lives, marriage, have been reflected by the 1950 new marriage law. And so specifically for the minimum legal ages of marriage, it has also been strategically used as a tool to realize the process of modernization, given that the Chinese state used to be very enthusiastic to promote this idea of modernization and associate with economic development. And specifically, the development here has been stepwise. So in 1950, women are allowed to getting married only when you are at least 18 years old, and it's 20 for men. And this is in the purpose of eradicate this traditionally practiced child or young marriage. And so during the 1970s, when this idea of family planning has been put on agenda, and so firstly, there has been this 晚期小 campaigns, meaning that late marriage, long birth intervals, and fewer birth. And so this marriage, the marriage age at marriage has not been officially changed, but actually late marriage was officially defined and encouraged. And so specifically, it is 23 and 25 for men and women in rural areas, and 25 to 28, 25 and 28 in urban areas, respectively, for women and men. So although during this period of time, it's not been officially adjusted from the original 18 and 20, but many of those local officials, work performance, have been largely contingent on the percentage of population that have got married at a late age, as late as this. And then we all know that in 1980, there has been this famous one-child policy put in place. And so the Chinese government actually adjusted the legal minimum age a little bit back, and given that 23, 25, 25, 28 is just insanely high, right? And so it's actually settled as 20 and 22 for women and men, regardless of rural and urban divide, region, and ethnicity. And so given that many of the ethnic minorities, especially Islam-oriented groups, have a very strong emphasis on early marriage, you could see the challenge faced by them to stay in between this official and state discourse and their ethnic identities, right? And so again, let's get a little bit more visual it. And so this is based on the most recent United Nations data on legal minimum age of marriage across countries and gender. And so note that actually this is a more underestimate of the level of comparisons, because in many countries, especially those countries host a sizable Muslim group, usually they have two different systems of age at marriage, and war have these two systems. One is the marriage of the age without parental approval, and the other one is with a parental approval. And so actually those young marriage approved by the parents can get married even younger. And what we've shown here is actually those without parental approval, meaning that the actual comparisons might be even more dramatic. So China right here, and 20 and 22. As a result, in this article, we would want to empirically examine the reasons behind Hui's unexpected high probability, high percentage of cohabitation. And so our dependent variable is ever cohabited, and we first examine the ethnic differences in that, and then we further examine how the level of endorsement of modern family forms, which is a composite measure based on these 9 previous mentioned modern family behaviors and also Islamic service attendance. So whether or not they have attend Islamic service regularly, at least once a month. And we also control for these basic socio and demographic variables. And we use first logistic regression to address this variety of this cohabitation outcome. And we also use follow-up qualitative interview to triangulate and interpret the patterns. And so some description based on the data. And so as you see on the aggregate, it's still that Han has a much lower percentage of ever cohabited. And in terms of their endorsement of modernity, we could see that Han is higher than Muslims and than Hui and Dongxiang. So let's see whether or not it seems not very likely that their high cohabitation is due to their higher level of modernity. And of course, Islamic civic attendance is 0 among Han and 66% among Hui and 78% among Dongxiang. And so time-wise, let's skip this and look at these main results. And so basically in model 1, we look at this main effect. And so in model 2, we further throw in this control variables. And so basically what we've seen is that there has been this consistent positive relationship between Muslim and ever cohabited, right? And both Hui and Dongxiang are much more likely to ever cohabited than their Han counterparts. And so in model 3, we further put in this level of modernity endorsement. And actually, it's not it that explains the ethnic differences. So we could see the ethnic differences stay strong. And only after we throw in religious attendance, religiosity, we could see that actually religiosity predicts cohabitation strongly. And after we include them, these ethnic differences disappears. So it's all about this preservation and maintenance of their religion-based identity. And one side note is that indeed education still is a very strong driver of modernity, that the higher education predicts like a higher percentage of cohabitation. And on the other hand, after we control for religiosity, you could see that actually women are more likely to cohabit, possibly due to the stronger constraints on sexual freedom among women than among men. And so our quality results actually corroborated our empirical patterns, quantitative patterns, and the consensus is that Hui marry around 15 to 16. You could imagine that it is not possible legally, given this universal legal minimum age, right? And so it must be religiously recognized, and legally speaking, they may play around the concept of cohabitation instead. And specifically, basically, early HS marriage is the way to monitor and control women's romantic and sexual lives and maintain their subordinate and domestic roles. And as a result, working and studying, especially outside the local communities, are strongly discouraged, particularly for women. And so just let me give you two quotes. Like one is from this young female, unmarried, and so she actually felt this very strong pressures not getting married until 21, right? And so she told us that the legal age is 20, but people here all get married around 15, 16. It's honorable to get married around that age, and girls who stay single after age 20 face great pressures. And when we probed why they're so insistent on girls getting married at that young age, they said that that's the way to keep women subordinate, right? If you're young, you don't know anything, you have no economic foundations, then you have no social status and just get married to cook and to take care of their husband families. And then for another middle-aged man who already married, and he basically mentioned the same thing. Girls often get married before age 18. If they don't get married, people may frown upon them, gossip about them. And when we ask if it is okay for girls to postpone marriage, for example, to pursue their personal goals, right, education, work, he didn't say directly no, but he basically gave us an example that this man used to work in Beijing, and so he had this landlord's daughter, went out to other places to study, and he basically described this very extreme negative lifestyles of that girl who went outside to study, that she didn't come back home nights after nights and went to nightclubs and bars and live a very decadent life, according to him. And so basically, when I interviewed with him, he like keeps looking at my like short sleeve shirt. And actually, when we conduct the interview, it's July in 2008. It's 2 months after this sad and disastrous May 12 earthquake in Sichuan, China. And so basically mentioned that for girls wearing short sleeve shirts like this, if it's old times, I would be like put into mosques and get a good beating. And so he also associated that behavioral like openness to the earthquake. And he said that the earthquake is a reminder from Allah, and young girls should put on veil and stop wearing short sleeve shirts and start to learn religion. And so definitely, if you like them to remain single, explore the world for too long, it's threatening to this purity and this expectations of chastity for women among the Muslim communities. Therefore, to summarize, so basically, as you know, that this rising prevalence of cohabitation, there has been economic aspects of it, but still fundamentally that has been driven by this increasing social acceptance of premarital sexual experiences, and which is still largely stigmatized by Chinese Muslim communities. And particularly this modernity has largely threatened this Islamic-based traditions among the Muslim groups, especially given, for example, Hui tension to assimilate and to maintain their group solidarity. And as a result, in response to this high legal minimum age of marriage, actually they did something creatively or strategically. They tried to make use of this newly emerged individual autonomy as cohabitation to maintain and preserve their religion-based traditions. And so cohabitation, given its secular prevalence and acceptance in China, provides this convenient alternative or this platform to fulfill the traditional substance of early marriage for many of the Chinese Muslim communities. All right, and so that's all on my end, and thank you everyone for listening.
We can open up the session to questions from the audience, and I think we'll extend the time past 1.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Thank you so much for this very interesting research. Hi, Zurek. Can I ask more than one question? I mean, okay, thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting because but it is so different from my field. I'm a anthropologist and a folklorist. So thank you so much first. And I have some questions about your the definition of terms and also the way that you do the research. I hope you can address them. The first one is about modernity. I mean, I think it sounds like that if you accept the cohabitation, you are modern by your definition. That is a little bit, I think, problematic to me because, and how do you define modernity now? How do the people in the field who responded to your survey, how do they define modernity? Probably they don't have the same values. They don't share the same values with you. And secondly, how do you define cohabitation? Why would we want to know about cohabitation patterns? So if you were suggesting cohabitation related to sexual freedom, then what if the people they just spend the weekend together, they have sex and stuff, but they don't live together? Do they call it cohabitation, or do you call it cohabitation? So probably you may want to provide more details about how you and the people in the field responding to your survey define cohabitation. That's my that's only my first question, and also I think it's great that you're aware that in China, on most occasions, the differences are regional rather than ethnic. So have you, say, compared to Hui or Dongxiang or Bao'an, whatever, in eastern big cities, like in Beijing, and the Han people in Gansu province? So I'm sure that there will be a difference. But what if the Hui in, say, Beijing city, they have more Hui in Beijing city, they accept the cohabitation before marriage. So do you think they are more modern than the Han people in Gansu? So that's my second question. And also, okay, so there's another question is that you're talking about Hui as a very united group without any inner diversity. But actually, I see that you read a lot of historians and anthropologists' work, like Jonathan Lippmann and Mulaney. And if you read them, you will know that actually as early as 1990s and Zhuge Liang has pointed out that the Hui people, at least they have 4 ways of self-identification: food ways, ancestors, like arrival legends, and inner marriage, and of course religious practice. So why do you highlight Islam? So do you have other ways to explain the differences? Yeah, so that's my questions. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your question. Totally. And so basically that's why for your first question about the internal diversity behind the definition of cohabitation, that's exactly why we discussed about this now this underpinnings of this diversity in the beginning. And so in China, so there has been like very special terms referring to cohabitation and premarital sex, and so 同居 and 婚前性行为. And so I think there is some consensus that 同居 is more stable and residence-based living arrangements in China, but which driven on this premarital sexuality. As a result, I think in China, of course, there are also diversity and different reasons, different meanings attached to it. But in this mainstream discourse, largely it is still been like driven by this higher acceptability of this idea that how it is about personal choice, how it is about personal expression. It's about this newly gained expression. And I think that kind of embedded in this broad patriarchal cultural backgrounds. And so as a result, I agree that we would be careful about handling that question. And given that, I think largely the value of this study is trying to uncover these nuances and this complications in the definition itself. Many of times we take it for granted that if you cohabit, you must be open-minded and must be embracing modernity, but actually many of the time it's not the case, and it's not the case for many scenarios around the world as well. But under this very specialized discourse, we are actually trying to uncover that take for granted narrative that how cohabitation not only reflect sexual freedom, but many of times it's actually like used or practiced strategically and due to very traditional reasons. And so secondly, totally, I agree that the patterns in, for example, Beijing or Shanghai might be very different. And so as we said that this is a localized study, but I think it's valuable in that, as we discussed throughout the presentation, it actually provides this quasi-natural experiment setting that basically things other than religiosity or ethnicity, religion, other than that, other things tends to be more homogeneous in this research setting. And yet we get a very salient marker ethnicity, and that ethnicity in the case for Hui in Gansu largely reflect their religion-based identity rather than something else. So totally, I would agree that a national study will present very heterogeneous patterns. And for this study, we actually emphasize the uniqueness and this value by focusing on this relatively socially homogeneous social setting. And so for the third question, internal diversity. And so totally in general, so even in the places we visited, there are 新教, 老教, this old teaching, new teaching, and these different sects, really like Islamic sects, totally. But it's a pity that in the survey, in the data itself, we don't have like better measures for that. And it could be like interesting and valuable of a future direction to go. Thank you.
Okay, next is Hushu, then Adam, then Agnes. And please keep your questions brief.
Yeah, thank you, Zheng, for the very intriguing findings. I have a kind of a related question. When I find the figures on the attitude about cohabitation and whether they cohabited already very striking. And initially I was thinking maybe because of the very strong religious beliefs, so there might be an underreporting of their approval, their attitudes towards cohabitation. But then when it comes to the actual behavior, then this issue due to social desirability kind of doesn't really stand. So I'm wondering, how was the survey question posed to these respondents? And because I'm thinking maybe when they answer this question about whether you have already cohabited, maybe the understanding is that because their marriage is socially recognized already, even though it's younger than the legal minimum age. So maybe the understanding is that they are basically reporting their kind of marital status as socially recognized. So not really what researchers have in mind about cohabitation is not exactly the same understanding the respondents have when they answer the question. So and I think one thing to kind of help to tease out is probably to look at the responses on this question by their age at marriage. So maybe those who were already married when they were 15 or 16, we see a higher proportion of cohabitation. And then for those who got married at a later age, Yeah, I'm not so sure about the age range of your respondents in the two Muslim groups. So yeah, just a hunch. Maybe looking at age range might help to address a little bit of this.
Okay. Thank you, Hushu. Yeah, thank you for your interesting question. And so for age range, it's all like covered adults at least 20 years old. And so I think I think there is a question asking about their year of marriage, and we will check how the marriage cohorts may pan out regarding the cohabitation. And secondly, totally, I am glad that you asked that about this cohabitation. And so we, the co-authors and I, we also discussed to what extent that actually the respondents, they may truthfully report that, or they may have a proper understanding about the definition. But first of all, that we see that the percentage of cohabitation reported is still very low in the sample. So given the very conservative setting, I believe that it is indication that they understand it the right way. They understand the way that we, in the mainstream understanding for most of them. And secondly, there is a separate question asked about their marital status. And of course, among those, and I would imagine that some of them might report it as married according to their legal marital status. And some others may report their cohabiting, but religiously recognize the marital relations as a married status. But for that group, we can not tell, but probably can tell a little bit with when we break down the patterns across marriage cohorts. And thirdly, and I'm thinking that it has to be that the data collector must be authoritative enough that the respondents think that it is there is a legal stake for them to report truthfully and legally binding. And so I think that is largely possible because basically this survey has been facilitated with the help of local officials carrying out these family planning campaigns. And so usually when we, even in 2008, we talked to them, they would say, oh, yeah, it's lunchtime. And so even, and so even the next year we talked to them, and so some of them, they will think that we were sent there from officials from the government, and they said that we have this difficulty and that, and so please let the government know, and so on. And so I think they, because of that, survey representatives, and it is considered authoritative or official enough to them for them to report their legally based marital status while reporting this religiously based marriage as cohabitation. And so, but in general, I agree that there might be someone actually will tilted towards married versus cohabitation, but still this higher percentage and this absolute lower percentage of cohabitation in the sample, the higher percentage among Muslims, and this absolute low level in the entire sample may indicate that they actually understand it right and they are actually answer according to the legal status.
Adam?
Hi,
Hello.
Adam.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's very interesting. The finding is totally out of my expectation. I have two questions. The first one I think is already asked by Husu, which is about the age, mean age of the respondent, because the dependent variable is ever cohabited, right? Yeah. So what period we are actually talking about for their cohabitation, I think is important because we are talking about legal age reform, right? age of marriage. So I think it matters, but given the small sample size, we cannot talk about the trend. But I think it would be interesting to mention a little bit more about the age and the period for the cohabitation. The second question is actually related to the interpretation. So I think the findings are very interesting, but how would you integrate your findings into a larger body of theoretical literatures? I think a lot of people have already studied cohabitation because they see it as indicators of the institutionalization of family, etc., etc. But in this case, I think it's not that, right?
No.
So how would you discuss this finding to discuss with reference to the literature? And more importantly, is this case of China, Hui Muslim, too unique? Is it unique and too unique? Is there any reference values for demographers outside China? How would you think about this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a very good question. And so actually, I tend to understand the value, the significance of the study more in the direction of these interactions between state power and individual identity. And so basically what is saying here is not about modern family behavior, but it is actually a response to the state control, like seeping through private lives through a very strategic way in coping with this loss of their ethnic identity. And so I think to a large extent, I think it is probably caters to the ethnic identity and this state power literature more. And at least that's my current intention in writing up the manuscript. And so it is not so much marriage and family paper, I would say.
Agnes, I believe you have a question.
Okay, hi, Prof. Could you hear me? Yeah. Thanks for your quite interesting presentation. Actually, my question, I have two questions. The first one I think is already asked by other people, and they already answered that. Because at first I find your findings. You mentioned that is their Islamic their religious practices significantly predict their cohabitation behavior, and I just thought, and in the qualitative interview, and they mentioned that the Muslim people, they still prefer the young marriage, and I just wonder whether they have the same the ideation of the cohabitation from their side is the same with our side. That is, which means maybe they treat the cohabitation or regard the cohabitation as in fact marriage or recognized marriage, because our legal marriage age for China is still older comparing to their believed marriage age. So I think whether there are different definitions of cohabitations. Yeah. The second question is that because they among the Islamic religious group, the people still prefer the young marriage, and I wonder whether this kind of cohabitation is supported or recognized by their family, or whether their parents or family members has some influence on their cohabitation choice. Yes, that's all my questions. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to open my camera. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Agnes. And yeah, and so first one, indeed, and so basically in surveys, it's very like hard facts and standardized, and so basically cohabitation is 同居, and 婚前性行为 is premarital sex, and so I think that it is understand like more regarding like whether or not it's just sexuality, or it's actually more stable residential patterns. And so when we did the interview, actually, we avoided using cohabitation directly, exactly because of concern that they may interpret differently. And so basically ask, so if two people, they don't get married, but they live together, do you think it's good? Actually, it is frowned upon, even among the Han interviewees. So in terms of this modern narrative, modern discourse, it is still largely conservative among the communities that we did the field work. And so I'm so sorry, I'm old, and so I forgot your second question. I already think it through, but I forget.
Yeah. The second question is about whether their parents or the family members has some
totally.
behaviors.
So especially that's I do have some quotes about that, and that is another aspect of why they are expected to get married young, and so they will listen to their parents, and through parents' arrangements, and they will marry someone within Islam, within Muslims, even within the same religious teaching. And so that young marriage is one way to facilitate parental control and this Islamic purity of the community as well.
Yeah, I just thought of a follow-up question. Yeah, because the results shows that is the religion has some significant influence. But comparing your previous the descriptive, I mean the charts for the premarital sex, they still have no or none of them. So so that's why I am wondering whether in their mind the premarital sex are
premarital sex. Yeah, so that means that probably some of them, they will like confuse between premarital sex and cohabitation, but definitely the discrepant distributions may actually indicate some others actually they distinguish the two, right? They don't think cohabitation is about that sexual freedom, but it's actually strategic living arrangements in order to fulfill this traditional practice of early marriage. Right.
Yeah. I think that's the reason why I question whether it's really because the religion. Because if it is the religious belief that lead to or predict the cohabitation, why the religion why they still ban the premarital sex, but have some agreement, or they can accept the cohabitation, but
I see what you mean.
So I think it's
no
or something others. Yeah.
So like as I said, that if for those who do distinguish between the two concepts, actually they will religiously recognize the couple as married. They will hold religious wedding ceremonies, although it's not legally registered, but according to Islam, they're married couple. But I think related to Hu Shu's earlier question, and so basically, I think the answer to that depends on to what extent that they think they are obliged to provide a truthful and legally binding answer. And I tend to believe that because of this official representative of survey, like interviewers. And so I would think that they would think that they would want to report their legal marital status. And but that's why I think cohabitation for many of them actually reflect about that special living arrangement rather than premarital sex.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Agnes.
Does anyone else have another question? I'll give a moment for someone to raise their hand. Well, if not, thank you for everyone attending the seminar, and thanks, of course, to Professor Mu for sharing her interesting research.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andy. And so sorry for running over time. Okay. Have a good weekend, everyone.